Your Royal Highness, the Director General of UNESCO, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry that I can't be there with you today to celebrate the launching of Paul Doodle's book on the history of UNESCO. I have a chapter in that book which I was supposed to read at the meeting. I'm not going to read anything because I've been on the receiving end of those sessions, and it's very trying mostly for the audience. So I'm going to describe the main themes of the article of the chapter, and hopefully you can then go to the book and delve into the footnotes and all the precise references that I make in writing. The title of my chapter is Combating Racism, Popularizing Anthropology, Alfred Métraux at the UNESCO Courier. I should say that this chapter is part of a larger research project dedicated to Métraux. The history of anthropology is very often focused on big names and intellectual biographies, and that is a system that I think that doesn't gather enough of the complexity of the emergence of this discipline. And Alfred Métraux, Swiss-born, brought up in Argentina, a student of Marcel Mauss and of Erland Nordenskjöld, the Swedish ethnologist, had a very itinerant life as a scholar. He worked in many places, doing field work in the Gran Chaco in South America, in Argentina, Paraguay, Bolivia, Brazil. He studied the Chipaya in the highlands of Bolivia. He studied the Incas of Peru, wrote a book about the subject, which is still very worth reading. And then was working for a few years at the Smithsonian, the Bureau of American Ethnology. Finally, he landed in UNESCO after the war. And what is very interesting about him is not only the variety of subjects that he tackled as an anthropologist slash historian, but also that he was in very direct and intimate contact with the intelligentsias of all of these places that he worked in. In Argentina, for instance, with Victoria Ocampo and her Sur magazine group. Victoria Ocampo is well known to UNESCO because she was a great supporter of UNESCO from the very beginning. And in the United States, well, he was part of that great school of anthropology, the Bureau of American Ethnology, and also had studied with Kreber, knew Robert Lowy, etc. I mean, he was, and in France, of course, Lévi-Strauss, Michel Leiris, Paul Rivet, and a host of other very well-known and influential intellectuals. So before the war, also he did a fantastic piece of work on Easter Island. So we've mentioned many places and a number of intellectual circles, and he was in contact with all of these people. And so if you want to write the history of anthropology in a different kind of way, opening the lens of your quest and then zeroing in on details, Métraux is a very good vehicle, a very good center for that kind of research. So the experience that turned Métraux away from anthropology and into applied anthropology was his work for the Morale Division, the United States Strategic Bombing Survey Unit in Germany. And they were, the Morale Division unit was advancing in German territory as soon as it was liberated by the Allied forces. So they were finding things that were absolutely appalling. They were some of the first people to walk into concentration camps. And Métraux has very searing letters to his wife Rhoda describing the human misery that he witnessed there. And we know that famously that I think it was Primo Levi who said that it was the end of literature. The concentration camps marked the end of literature, and if it was not Primo Levi, let's keep the sentence or the phrase, because that is what people experienced when they walked in and saw that. And we should also remember that Eisenhower adamantly wanted German civilians from around the camps to go. I mean, he had them marching in and witnessing what Hitler had done and the Nazis had done in their name. Just a side note here, those images were very difficult to stomach, so they were not released to the American public. And the first one to do so was Orson Welles, of course, with his imagination and his determination to do things that were worthwhile. In the film The Stranger, where he impersonates a Nazi militant that had taken refuge in the US and had chosen a small village in the Midwest and was teaching German there, or history. And eventually Edward G. Robinson tracks him down, and in order to convince his wife, who was unsuspecting of the life that this man had led before going to the U.S., shows her films taken by the Signal Corps, a film unit that was very extraordinary because Frank Capra worked for it, and John Ford and George Stevens, and so he showed some images of the concentration camp to the wife, and in doing that he shows those images also to the public and exposes an aspect of the war that had not been part of the headlines during the war. Anyway, that's the story of Métraux turning from academic studies, which he never abandoned anyway, to an applied type of knowledge. And the way to do that, how he chose to do it, was joining the United Nations. And he first worked in the Lake Success office in New York, and then in the early 1950s he transferred to UNESCO and was put in charge of the race and racial prejudices project at UNESCO. This is a topic about which Paul Dudal, the editor of the book we were celebrating today, is an expert on and has written plenty about. So I refer you to what Paul has written on the race project. Anyway, another thing that happened to Métraux in UNESCO was meeting with Sandy Koffler. Sandy Koffler was an American, and he had studied with Lévi-Strauss at the École des Hautes Études in exile in New York, and then he had also gone to Europe as part of the army, and he was in charge of publishing newspapers, communicating to the people in towns that had been captured from the Germans what was going on. So he created a number of newspapers named after the town that had been liberated, and the common title was The Courier. So when Sandy Koffler joined UNESCO, he was put in charge of the UNESCO Courier. And let me read to you the aims of the Courier. Well, the motto of the journal was "A window on the world." It had a very definite ethnological bent from the beginning. Curiosity about other cultures, the need to communicate with other cultures, the need to understand them, and so the Courier was a vehicle for all that. But it was the mandate of the journal was to document the impact of science on human life, racial problems, art and culture, human rights, history and archaeology, cultural differences, and conflicts between peoples. So the mandate was very humanistic, and I don't think it would be exaggerated to say that Koffler was passionate about this. He was very demanding. He had a high sense of quality, and he surrounded himself with the best possible people to address all these issues that the journal was supposed to focus on. And I should perhaps also read to you a section of the paper of my chapter that is dedicated to Koffler and Métaux and to the Courier, because I think it's the core of the paper in terms of the relationship between the two of them, which was very interesting. Perhaps one of Koffler's most inventive editorial decisions, as it contributed greatly to the originality of the Courier, happened at the very onset. It was to deliver the news of what UNESCO was doing with a straight face. In both the format of the presentation and the style of the writing, the Courier looked like a regular newspaper. And this produced the effect, not devoid of mischief, deliberate or casual, I think it was deliberate, of placing news about culture and science unapologetically, at the same level and rank as regular news. It assumed that there was an audience out there that would take the subject matter of the Courier seriously and did not talk down to it. If UNESCO's first years were characterized by the idealism and activism of a remarkable array of scientists, writers, artists, and intellectuals from different countries and cultures, the Courier was its perfect mirror. This intense portrayal of humanism on the march was too good to be true, a document of an almost parallel world of bold thinking and generosity of spirit. The Republic of Letters reborn from the ashes of World War II and with a megaphone. Métaux was very close to Koffler and used the pages of the Courier to popularize anthropology. It is an extraordinary adventure to examine the collection of UNESCO Couriers from 1950s and early 60s, when Koffler and Métaux collaborated. The quality and variety of the articles and topics treated is nothing short of astonishing. In the first issue alone, there are articles by Julian Huxley, Joseph Needham, the philosopher Jacques Maritain, and the fiery John Grierson, who was advocating, as usual, for the value of documentary filmmaking. More remarkable still is that the flow of first-rate articles by prominent authors in many fields, as well as the announcement of projects in the arts and sciences, continues unabated for years. In later issues, filmmaker Jean Rouch writes on the awakening of African cinema, Henri Cassirier on the effects television has on reading, Thurgood Marshall on Brown versus Board of Education. There's a long lost letter from Gandhi to Tolstoy, articles by Joan Miró on Calder and the philosopher Bertrand Russell, several articles by Lévi-Strauss, by historian Basil Davidson, criticizing the legacy of colonialism in Africa. There's a piece on a very young Félix Idubor, the Nigerian sculptor. Another one on a woman life in an African village, on why Japanese women won't marry farmers. Entire issues dedicated to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, on racism, on the American Negro, the treatment of foreigners, their rights and the protection of children, women's rights, Orient-Occident, a study in ignorance, a remarkable issue on race relations in Brazil, with an editorial by Métraux and photographs by his close friend Pierre Verger. Métraux contributed 23 articles to the Courier. He did not pull his punches, even though there were risks involved, mainly back in the United States, where all the articles related to racism and separate but equal apartheid state of affairs in the country was very heavily censored by senators, and so the idea of cutting funds to UNESCO was already on the table. So there were risks in doing these things. The cover of the August-September 1953 issue carries the picture of an African woman. She's looking at the camera with an expression of calm defiance. Next to the picture it reads, "The intellectual fraud of racial doctrines." Métraux wrote the editorial. The title, "A Man with Racial Prejudices is as Pathetic as His Victim." It is a long piece that continues on the inside pages under the subtitle, "Slavery Ended When Men Thought It Shameful. The same will be good for racism." Those were fighting words. Well, the Courier, the UNESCO Courier, was part of UNESCO, and it was supposed to cover the activities of UNESCO. And Métraux was part of the Social Sciences Department, and not everything was straightforward or easy in that department. This is now going a little bit underground and looking at the difficulties of administering such an ambitious mission. At the beginning of the social sciences department life, an American sociologist, Edward Shields was, and Otto Klinberg were very influential. They were social psychologists. Métraux was familiar with their work because part of the questionnaire that the Moral Division used in Germany was fashioned by Otto Klinberg. And Métraux was not very happy with this idea, as an ethnographer, obviously. He was not very happy with the idea that you could transfer the same methodology used for constructing opinion polls to the description of cultural and social realities that are always much more complex. So Shields had the notion that the UNESCO should engage in a project called the Tensions Project. And the Tensions Project was supposed to measure the tensions between countries and have like a chart and monitor the chart and see when the tensions between two countries was coming to a flaring point. An idea that you can consider naive and even a little bit silly, but those were some of the ideas that were being funded and were being pursued. So at the social sciences, as a member of the social sciences department, Métraux was not only pursuing anthropology, he was also having intellectual and turf fights with these other people that had a very different notion of how to report on cultures. And one of the products of this Tensions project was the cultures at a distance idea. The idea that you could, like a psychologist sitting in your armchair, provide a psychological interpretation of an entire country. Another idea was a book series that meant to explain countries to the world and written by members of that country. And so a series of books were published. It was such a crazy idea that it was a short-lived series. But anyway, I will show you some covers of the books that did come out. Of course, I mean, this idea of writing books to enlighten others on your own culture, having novelists doing that, and having anthropologists doing that was a little bit pedantic, for lack of another word coming to mind right now. So another problem was also the coexistence of two terms that are not always in agreement, science and culture. And in that sense, Julian Huxley, the founding director of UNESCO, embodied the controversy between the two terms, because he was the great nephew of Matthew Arnold and the grandson of Julian Huxley, of Thomas Henry Huxley. And Arnold and Huxley had engaged in a tough controversy in the 19th century. Arnold defending a Ciceronian view of culture. Culture is a revision and a study of the classics and of the great works of art that humankind has produced. Huxley was saying, no, science is what teaches people to think, because you have to evaluate evidence and you cannot take just anything for granted. So Julian Huxley came from that kind of background, and he embodied the idea that we had gone through, that the world since its creation had gone through several phases, an inorganic phase, an organic phase, and then when Homo sapiens appeared on the scene, a psychological, biological phase, which is the one that we are living in. And one can understand how anthropologists would find those ways of organizing the history of man and the current situation in facing the sciences and the humanities a little bit difficult to take. Metro, of course, was on the side of the humanists, without despising science. Another problem for anthropologists was the fact that, of course, anthropology is a byproduct of colonialism and in many ways, and that relationship cannot be ignored. So there was the problem of speaking for other people and then letting those other people speak for themselves. And Lévi-Strauss pointed to that in an article for the Courier, saying that it would be welcome that the so-called primitives, language that was still being used, would turn the tables around and began to do field work among the French, or among the British, or among the Americans. And that was an idea that Metro also liked. I mean, he was a very strong supporter of autoethnography. I mean, ethnography is written by the people that were normally the subject matter of ethnographies. And he's responsible for starting that line of research in Chile, where he taught a course in the 1950s. In any case, I mean, just to round off this brief presentation, Metro in the 50s, as he worked for UNESCO, was at the middle, or in the middle, of a very effervescent series of developments in anthropology. And he was defending a line that was eventually not successful, but that doesn't mean that it will not be in the future. His sources of inspiration for anthropology went back to Giambattista Vico, the Neapolitan philosopher, who, after Newton published his Principia Mathematica, came up with the idea that you could be as rigorous doing social science as a physicist working in a laboratory. And the key to do that was also take evidence very carefully. On the other hand, even though he had been in Germany looking at the disasters caused by fanaticism and by the ideology of the Nazis, he was very concerned with rescuing a line of anthropological thinking that was very German and that went back to Kant, to Herder, to Goethe, and in the 19th century to field workers, pioneers of field work in the modern sense, like Koch Grunberg and von den Steinen in the Amazon. So he was defending a German intellectual tradition as well as an anthropologist. Well, I hope that this gives you an idea of what I've covered in my paper. It's only an idea because the paper is much more involved than the talk that I just improvised. So I would recommend you to go, if you're interested, to go and read it. And I thank you very much for paying attention to me.